After my wife betrayed me with my more admired brother, my ex-in-laws and parents completely cut ties with me. They idolized him and discarded me like I didn't matter. However, things seem to have gone downhill for them lately, as they're suddenly reaching out incessantly, wanting to visit. Apparently, my brother has left her for someone else, and now they expect me to step back in, claiming it's my obligation as a man to reclaim my place. I never thought I would share this story publicly, but recent events have brought me to my breaking point, and I need some perspective. My ex-wife Julie, 34, and I were married for 8 years before it all unraveled. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and what I believed was a happy, secure marriage followed. Julie was charismatic, reliable, and attractive, the kind of person who made others think I was lucky. We shared the same life goals, and she was always supportive of my career, making our relationship feel strong and right. I never could have imagined how wrong I was. Growing up, I was the dependable, mature one in my family, often praised by my parents as someone who would make a great husband someday. In contrast, my younger brother Luke was the golden child. Handsome, charming, and the center of attention, he was adored by everyone. People were easily won over by his magnetic personality. Though it was obvious my parents favored him, I chalked it up to typical family dynamics and didn't dwell on it. I loved my brother and accepted it. In hindsight, I should have noticed the warning signs earlier. Luke was frequently around us, as our families were close, and he and Julie got along exceptionally well. Too well, as it turned out. One day, I came home early from work, feeling unwell. The house was quiet, but I noticed Luke's bag in the living room. Initially, I assumed he had just dropped by for a visit. As I moved down the hall, I heard voices coming from our bedroom. My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay calm, convincing myself not to jump to conclusions. However, when I opened the door and saw them together, my entire world collapsed. The stunned expressions on their faces are seared into my memory. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The confrontation itself is a blur. I was too shocked to process what was happening. I left that day with whatever belongings I could gather and never returned. But the betrayal didn't stop there. It got even worse afterward. Seeking comfort, I turned to my parents, hoping for support during the most painful experience of my life. Instead, I was met with indifference. Rather than standing by me, they offered condescending platitudes about how marriage is complex and hinted that maybe I had driven Julie away. They even suggested Luke had done her a favor by showing her real love. My own family treated me like I was the one at fault, as if I'd pushed Julie into my brother's arms. Things continued to spiral. Julie's parents, whom I'd grown close to over the years, instantly took her side, enchanted by Luke and seeing him as the ideal son-in-law. I tried reaching out several more times, but eventually realized I was completely abandoned. Both families fully supported Julie and Luke, treating me as if I was disposable and easily replaced by someone they deemed a better fit. The divorce was swift and emotionally brutal. I couldn't bear to keep anything tied to Julie or our past, so I left most of it behind. I moved into a small apartment and had to start over alone. Thanks to my family's influence, my social circle dissolved as they portrayed me as bitter and unstable, while Luke was seen as the hero who saved Julie from me. Despite all this, I persevered. I immersed myself in work and gradually met new people. Friends who had no idea about the turmoil I'd endured. Kind neighbors and fresh friendships helped me rebuild. I realized I didn't need my family to be whole. I found a strength and independence I never knew I had. Though the process was grueling, I felt proud of myself for making it through. Just as I began finding peace, everything shifted again. Out of nowhere, my phone was bombarded with calls and messages from both my parents and Julie's family. Initially, I dismissed it as a cruel joke or guilt-driven check-ins, but the persistence made me finally listen to a voicemail. What I heard was shocking. Luke had left Julie. He had found another woman and walked out without any warning. Now, with Julie heartbroken, both families were desperate to fix the mess. And who did they think should step in to fill Luke's void? Mr. Apparently, I was still the rightful husband in their eyes. They actually expected me to return to Julie and resume the role, as if I had just been waiting in the background. Their messages were emotionally manipulative, disguised as concern but full of pressure. Initially, they pleaded for forgiveness, but the tone quickly shifted, emphasizing how it was my duty as a man to give Julie another chance. My father even suggested it would prove my value as a son, as though I hadn't already spent years sacrificing for a family that discarded me without hesitation. Julie's relatives also spoke up, insisting she was lost without me, and urging me to return to keep the family united. It felt as though my own pain and sense of betrayal were dismissed entirely. All they seemed to care about was preserving appearances. It was as if I was supposed to overlook the fact that they had all abandoned me. This has made me incredibly angry. After everything I had endured, losing my family, my wife, and my social circle, these people believed they could simply call me back, as though I owed them something. They acted as if I hadn't been discarded and replaced like an old, unwanted piece of furniture. The most infuriating part was how they acted like I should feel lucky to be invited back. For a while, I wrestled with whether I should confront them. Part of me wanted to shout, to make them understand just how deeply they had hurt me and how absurd their demands were. But another part of me realized they wouldn't get it. They never saw me as a person with real emotions, just as someone useful for maintaining the image they wanted. Confronting them wouldn't make a difference. They'd twist it around, make it about themselves, or accuse me of being overly dramatic. So I've been ignoring their calls, trying to find peace in the life I've rebuilt. But they keep intruding. Every few days, there's another voicemail or text message, pulling me back into that place of anger and pain. They don't see me as an individual with a life and personal struggles. They only view me as a tool to clean up their chaos. It's been emotionally draining, and I'm exhausted from feeling like the only one who recognizes how wrong all of this is. I know I'm justified in refusing to return, but part of me wonders if I'm missing something. Should I confront them and try to make them see the harm they've caused? Or should I block them all and leave them to deal with their own mess? I've made so much progress, yet this entire ordeal has reopened old wounds I thought were healed. Update. Hi everyone, I wish I could say things have improved, but the situation has only worsened since my last post. My inbox has been flooded with even more messages and calls from both my family and Julie's relatives, making it overwhelming to keep up. My phone constantly buzzes with notifications, to the point where I dread checking it. I've tried blocking numbers, but they keep finding ways to contact me, whether through new numbers or emails. It feels like they're determined to wear me down. What truly shocked me was a call from Julie herself. I usually avoid picking up unknown numbers, but I answered this time, thinking it might be work-related or a friend. The moment I heard her voice, my stomach dropped. It was Julie, launching into what sounded like a rehearsed apology. She claimed to be deeply sorry and admitted to making terrible mistakes. I was stunned by the sheer audacity. She spoke as if she had simply forgotten to run an errand, not as if she had destroyed our marriage by cheating with my own brother. She kept insisting we owed it to each other to work things out, emphasizing our years together as something not to be discarded. Hearing her mention our 8-year marriage like it was some treasured bond I should cherish despite everything felt like a gut punch. She talked about reconciliation, saying we both owed each other the chance to rebuild. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it all. as if a few apologies could undo the betrayal, isolation, and devastation she had caused. Julie continued mentioning how she missed the stability we had, and now realized she wanted to settle down, especially since Luke was gone. She kept using phrases like we, our life, and our history, as if she still had the right to speak about us as a unit. I was too shocked to respond, growing angrier with every word. When I finally interrupted, I demanded to know why she cared now, after all this time. She offered a weak excuse, claiming she had only recently realized what she'd lost, and believed I was strong enough to move forward and take her back, as if strength meant tolerating her betrayal. After I ended the call, messages from my dad began pouring in more persistently than before. He had the nerve to suggest that Julie's plea for forgiveness was proof of her sincerity and that I should see it as a victory. He even asked, "Isn't it enough that she's asking for another chance?" The arrogance made my blood boil. They acted as though Julie's half-hearted attempt at reconciliation was something I should feel grateful for, completely ignoring the fact that I had been the one wronged, discarded like I was nothing. I kept asking myself, how could a few words ever be enough? Could they really expect me to return to her as if nothing had happened? Out of sheer frustration, I called Luke. I wasn't even sure what I intended to say. I just needed to let it out. He didn't answer, so I left a voicemail saying the entire disaster was his fault, and he should be the one to handle it. I reminded him that he had shattered my marriage and my life, making it his responsibility to explain himself to our parents and own up to his actions. I was so enraged that I followed up with an email to make sure he couldn't avoid me. I detailed every betrayal, every moment he could have stopped, but chose not to, listing each point clearly. My anger and pain were overwhelming, and I didn't hold back. As expected, Luke never replied. It was typical of him. He created this chaos, tore apart two families, and then vanished without a second thought. Now he was probably with someone new, unconcerned with the damage he left behind. Meanwhile, I was left to handle the aftermath alone, bombarded with calls and emails from family who seemed to think I could somehow fix everything. They acted like I was a disposable piece, to be picked up and discarded at their convenience. One particularly painful call came from my uncle, someone I had always trusted. He was practically pleading with me to be reasonable, saying people make mistakes, and true forgiveness means giving second chances. He insisted that, as a man, it was my duty to be compassionate and show grace during hard times. His words felt like a betrayal, as if my pain and heartache were less important than preserving a false sense of harmony. I was so shaken I couldn't even respond. I just hung up and cried. Part of me wishes I could sever ties completely, but it's so difficult. Despite everything, I still long for their acceptance and approval. I know it's unhealthy, and they've shown their true colors, yet it still hurts. Some part of me remains that vulnerable child hoping for unconditional love from my parents, even though I now understand they will never provide it. That realization stings almost as much as the betrayal itself. So here I am, feeling lost all over again. I thought I had moved on, that I had managed to rebuild my life, but they keep dragging me back into this mess. Part of me wants to confront them, to lay bare how hollow their so-called family values really are. Yet another part wonders if it's even worth the effort. They've revealed who they are, and deep down, I know no explanation will make them see me for who I am or respect my boundaries. But cutting ties completely is hard when they keep pulling me back in. I'm exhausted, mentally and emotionally. It feels like they're trying to undo all the peace I've fought so hard to find. I know I shouldn't let them affect me, but it's so difficult not to feel like I'm somehow in the wrong, even when I know I'm not. It's been a few weeks since I last tried to make sense of all this, and honestly, nothing has settled. If anything, the drama has only intensified, like someone hit fast forward. The constant calls, texts, and emails from both my family and Julie's became so overwhelming that I finally blocked their numbers, emails, and social media accounts. It wasn't an easy decision, but I needed boundaries, anything to stop my head from spinning. For a few days, I felt like I had won a small victory. My phone stayed silent, no longer lighting up with guilt-tripping messages. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of quiet. But, of course, the peace was short-lived. Nothing about this situation seems to let me catch my breath for long. Just a few days later, I came home from work exhausted, only to find my dad standing outside my apartment like it was completely normal. My stomach sank. I hadn't told him where I moved after the divorce, so the fact that he found me felt like a serious violation of my privacy. For a moment, I considered turning around and pretending I hadn't seen him. But I knew avoiding him would only postpone the inevitable. He'd just keep showing up until I faced him. It was classic Dad, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. He began talking about how the family was falling apart, how Julie was miserable, and how Luke's absence was a wound no one knew how to heal. He kept repeating how family is everything, as if that meant I was obligated to fix the damage just because we were related. He insisted it was my duty to let go of the past, saying families are meant to move forward together. He even mentioned Christmas, suggesting it was the perfect chance to reunite and make peace. I couldn't believe the audacity. This was the same man who had stood by while my wife and brother destroyed my life. And now he expected me to be the one to repair the damage? I felt like my head was going to explode from the frustration. But more than that, I was just exhausted. I stood there silently, trying to stay composed while he kept lecturing me about forgiveness and moving on. Eventually, he left, but the weight of his words lingered. I felt completely drained, as if I'd been squeezed dry like an old dishcloth. It was a harsh reminder of just how unimportant I was in my family's hierarchy. Definitely far from the top. But that wasn't even the most painful part. Shortly after that emotional ambush, I received an email from Julie. It had been a while since I'd last heard from her, so seeing her name in my inbox felt like a punch to the gut. Her message was brief, but clearly intentional. She mentioned understanding why I was upset and suggested we talk things through to clear the air. To twist the knife further, she attached a photo from our wedding day. Once, that picture had made me smile, but now it just turned my stomach. Without a second thought, I deleted the email. I wasn't about to let her worm her way back into my mind, no matter how apologetic she tried to sound. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get more absurd, Luke reached out. His email came out of nowhere with the subject line, "I'm sorry." For a fleeting moment I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe he's finally going to take responsibility for his actions. But no, his so-called apology was nothing more than a series of justifications. He rambled about never intending to hurt me, and how his relationship with Julie just happened because they were in love, as if that somehow excused their betrayal. To make it even worse, he had the nerve to express hope that Julie and I could reconcile, as if his blessing meant anything to me anymore. I was so furious, I could hardly think straight. How do you even respond to something like that? Spoiler, you don't. I deleted his email just like I had hers. There was no point in engaging with people so blind to the harm they'd caused. It felt like they were trying to rewrite reality, acting as if their choices had no real consequences. But I wasn't about to let them manipulate me into questioning what had happened. These past few weeks have been some of the hardest of my life. The betrayal, the pressure to forgive, the constant attempts at emotional manipulation, it's all been so overwhelming. Therapy has helped, but progress feels painfully slow. It's difficult to stay hopeful when everything around me seems to drag me backward. Still, I'm trying. If nothing else, this entire mess has shown me how crucial it is to prioritize my own well-being, even when everything else pressures me to do the opposite. With the holidays approaching, I know things are going to be challenging. The constant focus on family togetherness feels like it will be inescapable. But for the first time, I'm refusing to let that control my choices. I've spent too long keeping the peace and putting everyone else's happiness above my own. Now, it's time to make decisions that benefit me, even if that means disappointing a few people. It's far from easy, though. There are still days when guilt creeps in. I think about the messages I've ignored, the people I've cut out of my life, and wonder if I'm doing the right thing. But then I remind myself of everything they've done, the lies, the betrayals, and I know this is what I have to do. I'm realizing that I don't owe anyone my peace of mind, happiness, or mental health. It's okay to walk away from those who don't respect my boundaries, no matter who they are. The path ahead is uncertain, and I'm sure more challenges lie ahead, especially during the holiday season. But I refuse to let my past control my future. Update 3. Hello, everyone. I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for your kind words, advice, and support. Reading through the experiences of others who've faced similar situations has been incredibly eye-opening. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in dealing with something so painful and complicated. This community has become an unexpected safe space for me, and I'm genuinely grateful for that. I didn't think things could get worse, but life has a way of surprising you. And not in a good way. Since my last update, the situation has taken another difficult turn. It feels like everyone involved has decided they won't back off. Instead of giving me space to heal, they've doubled down on their efforts to guilt-trip, manipulate, and pressure me back into a situation I fought so hard to leave. The chaos feels endless, and I'm constantly struggling to protect my peace. The biggest red flag was a letter I received from Julie's parents about a week ago. At first, I thought it might be a sincere attempt at reconciliation, or maybe an apology for their involvement in everything. But no, the letter was nothing but accusations. They called me selfish and immature for not forgiving Julie and reuniting the family. Somehow, my refusal to engage was being twisted into making things harder for everyone else, as if fixing the damage they helped create was my responsibility. But the most infuriating part came at the end of the letter. They threatened to ruin my reputation with our mutual friends if I didn't do the right thing and speak with Julie. Seriously, what exactly were they planning to expose? That I set boundaries? That I refused to forgive someone who cheated on me with my own brother? The whole thing was outrageous, and only confirmed just how right I was to step away from this toxic mess. I couldn't place my trust in these individuals. I had to safeguard myself from them at all costs. Then Julie chose to escalate the situation. One day while I was at work, focused on my tasks, a colleague informed me that someone was waiting for me in the lobby. Initially, I assumed it was a delivery or a friend making an unexpected visit. However, I was wrong. When I stepped out, there stood Julie, resembling a character from a romantic comedy, clutching a bouquet of flowers. My stomach dropped. It was the last thing I needed, and it felt like time had frozen. Why did she think this was acceptable? The issue wasn't just the flowers, it was the fact that she had come to my workplace, my sanctuary, despite my repeated insistence that I wanted her out of my life. She had blatantly disregarded the boundaries I had set, as if a bouquet could somehow mend everything she had shattered. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was humiliating. My co-workers were watching, their stares making the spectacle even worse. Julie, however, seemed oblivious to the awkwardness. She kept rambling about how sorry she was and how much she missed me, as though her feelings were the only thing that mattered. she insisted we were destined to be together, ignoring the fact that my shattered heart proved otherwise. It felt like she was twisting the narrative to paint herself as the heartbroken victim when she was the one responsible for this mess. Her behavior was selfish, and honestly, it felt manipulative, like she was trying to make me feel guilty instead of owning up to her actions. I was furious, but had to keep my composure. I firmly told her to leave immediately, that this wasn't the place for her apology. She refused to listen, so I turned back to my office, trembling with frustration. Once inside, I locked the door, trying to calm myself. I eventually called security to have her escorted out. I didn't want to escalate the situation, but it had become clear there was no other option. I had to protect myself again. Later that evening, I made a heartbreaking choice I never imagined I'd have to make. I filed for a restraining order against Julie. The thought of needing legal protection from someone I once deeply cared for was devastating, but I knew it was the only way to ensure she stayed out of my life for good. I couldn't just sit back while she kept invading my space, leaving me feeling powerless. I had to reclaim control. Meanwhile, my family hasn't let up either. Despite cutting off contact, they've found new ways to reach out. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent me a lengthy message about forgiveness, claiming everyone missed me, without ever acknowledging how they had abandoned me during my most difficult time. Then an uncle I barely know chimed in with an email urging me to rise above and release my anger. It's unbelievable that these people, who played no part in the betrayal, feel entitled to dictate how I should heal. They have no understanding of the pain I've endured. But the most painful part has been my father. Despite our last heated confrontation, where I clearly expressed my desire to stay away from this drama, he continues trying to guilt me into returning. Just a few days ago, he left a voicemail claiming I was tearing the family apart by refusing to forgive Julie and Lucas. He completely ignored the hurt they caused me, focusing only on how my choices affected them. It's exhausting. Each time I begin to find peace, someone drags me back into the turmoil. Yet, through all this, I've come to a powerful realization. I deserve better. I deserve more than Julie, more than my family's toxicity, and more than the life they tried to impose on me. I've moved into a new apartment they don't know about. I've tightened my privacy, new phone number, enhanced security on my accounts. It's disheartening to take such extreme measures, but they're necessary for my well-being. Therapy has been my anchor. My therapist has helped me see that it's not only acceptable, but essential to protect myself by cutting off harmful influences. Healing is slow, and some days it feels like I'm barely holding on, but for the first time in a long while, I'm prioritizing myself. And that's a step I've never taken before.